Marlon Brando heard the click before he saw the object. A single brass bullet casing rolled across the makeup table and stopped beside his call sheet. Not dropped by accident. Not left behind. Placed. Not for him. Not yet. The mirror bulbs kept buzzing, hot and steady, washing his face in a harsh, honest light. Powder dust hung in the air like dry fog. The set outside the door was ready for fiction, camera marks on the floor, a prop gun locked in a case, coffee cooling in paper cups. But something real had slipped past the locks. Because on a set like this, the wrong object doesn't show up unless the wrong people are already inside. This would either become a story people whispered about for decades, or the day the film learned who really owned the room. Brando didn't pick it up. He didn't look around fast. He didn't give the room the satisfaction of seeing him search. He stayed in character without speaking, face calm, posture fixed, as if stillness itself could hold a line. Behind him, a grip froze mid-step with a coil of cable in his hands. A makeup assistant pretended to wipe a brush that was already clean, eyes locked on the mirror, not on the room. A PA swallowed and stared at the floor like it might open. Nobody asked, who brought that? Because everyone knew the real answer would have a name attached to it. A door opened softly, then stopped halfway, like someone had decided not to enter fully. A man in a dark suit stood there, not crew, not security, not introduced. No studio badge. No union card clipped to his lapel. His shoes were too clean for a soundstage, and he carried no equipment. He didn't smile. He didn't scan the room. He looked straight at Brando's reflection, not Brando, as if addressing the image was safer than addressing the man. "Mr. Brando," he said, voice low enough to feel private even in a crowded space. "Busy day." Brando's eyes stayed on the mirror. "Are they ever not?" he said. The man's gaze dropped to the casing, then lifted again. "Some people are paying attention," he said. And the way he said people told the room it wasn't fans. It was ownership. Rewind, only enough to reveal the trap. Godfather wasn't just a movie to the city around it. It was a signal. It looked like fiction, but it moved like a blueprint. And blueprints make real builders nervous. On paper, the set belonged to the studio. In practice, power belonged to whoever could stop trucks from arriving, phones from ringing back, and doors from opening when you needed them. The unions, the permits, the bookings, the whole machine could be tightened or loosened with one quiet call. When that machine tightened, careers didn't explode. They vanished, no headlines, no scandal, just silence where a name used to be. That was the personal cost. That was the rule everyone on this set understood without admitting. Brando had spent years learning how rooms work, not by reading men, but by watching what men avoided. Who didn't introduce themselves? Who didn't hurry? Who didn't need to repeat a request? He'd heard the name in passing long before this set existed. Genovese. Not shouted, not bragged, said the way you say weather when the storm is already overhead and you're already wet. He had seen men like that at charity dinners, in back booths, near exits that never seemed to open. Men who spoke softly because they expected the world to lean in. Outside the door, the stage manager called for a 5-minute reset. No one moved. Even routine commands sounded like decisions that required approval. The suit kept his hands visible, empty, respectful. But his presence made the room feel audited, as if every breath would be filed away and used later. A cart of wardrobe suits rolled past the open doorway and stopped, unattended. The fabric smelled of dry cleaning and old smoke. 2 extras in dark ties stared for a second too long, then looked away like they'd been caught watching a crime. The man stepped 1 pace closer and stopped at the edge of the makeup station, close enough to claim space, far enough to stay polite. "You're doing something very convincing," he said. Brando didn't move. "That's the job." A thin pause. The kind that carries instructions without words. "Convincing can be sensitive," the man added, "to certain families." Brando finally turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge him without giving him dominance. "If it's sensitive," Brando said, "then it's familiar." The casing stayed on the table, bright under the bulbs, like a punctuation mark nobody could erase. And in the silence that followed, the room understood the new rule. This wasn't about a performance anymore. It was about permission. The man didn't answer right away. He let the silence stretch, testing whether Brando would fill it. That was the first real move. Brando didn't help him. He turned back to the mirror, adjusted nothing, and stayed exactly where he was. The casing remained untouched, a quiet reminder that this conversation wasn't symbolic. In the hallway, a studio phone rang once and stopped. No one reached for it. Even sound could be misread here. The man nodded once, as if a decision had been confirmed. "That kind of familiarity," he said, "usually comes with expectations." Brando's voice stayed even. "Then whoever expects something," he said, "should have written it into the script." The reply wasn't sharp. That made it worse. Because sharp answers invite arguments. Calm ones end negotiations. And the men who lived by negotiations heard the ending in his tone. Attempt 2 arrived with weight. Another man entered without knocking, older, heavier, face worn smooth by rooms like this. A thick ring caught the light when he moved his hand. He didn't look at the casing. He didn't need to. He spoke to the first man, not Brando. "Is this the scene?" The first man hesitated, just long enough to expose uncertainty, the kind of hesitation that costs people jobs. The older man finally looked at Brando. "You understand how this works," he said. "Accuracy creates attention. Attention creates problems." Brando met his eyes fully this time. "Only for people who recognize themselves," he said. A few crew members shifted where they stood. A boom operator tightened his grip until his knuckles went pale. No one pretended this was still about filmmaking. This was the moment it stopped being a rumor. The older man smiled thinly. "We're not asking for changes," he said. "We're asking for balance." Brando's answer came immediately. "Balance is for fiction," he said. "Reality only cares about leverage." The smile disappeared. The room felt smaller, like the walls had moved in a fraction. A fan in the corner rattled and then went quiet. They moved the conversation without moving their bodies. The older man's hand rested near the table edge, not touching the casing, but close enough to acknowledge it. "You're in a position," he said carefully, "where cooperation keeps things smooth." Brando didn't look down. "I'm in a position," he said, "where I do my job." The distinction landed harder than a threat, because it removed the usual doorway of compromise. And the silence after that answer was louder than any warning. Attempt 3 didn't come from them. It came from fear inside the room. A producer stepped forward, voice tight, eyes flicking between faces. "Gentlemen," he said, "maybe we can talk later. We're burning daylight." The older man turned to him slowly. "This is the talk," he said. The producer stopped breathing for a moment. His mouth opened, then closed. He stepped back like he'd touched something hot. Brando watched the exchange without expression. He didn't intervene. He didn't rescue anyone. Power wasn't about stepping in. It was about deciding when not to. A PA near the doorway slid a clipboard behind his back like it might offend someone. A prop man set a glass of water down and forgot to let go for a beat. The older man leaned back slightly, reassessing. "You don't seem nervous," he said to Brando. Brando shrugged, "Barely. Nervousness changes performances," he said. "I don't allow that." The sentence carried a double meaning, and everyone heard it. Not only a performer speaking, a man stating a policy. The men exchanged a look that didn't ask permission. It measured risk. This had gone further than expected. The casing was finally nudged, just a fraction of an inch, toward Brando. Not a threat, a reminder. The room waited for the first flinch. It didn't come. Brando placed his hand flat on the table, not on the casing. Beside it. He didn't claim it. He contained it. The room felt the shift immediately. This wasn't escalation. It was containment. The contact ended without anyone saying it was over. That was how these things concluded. No permission, no closure, just a shared understanding that the room would remember. A pause followed, longer than comfort allowed. Not silence. Suspension. Someone near the doorway shifted their weight and stopped. A sound technician lowered his headphones without realizing it. The set, built for noise, held its breath. One of the men made a small gesture. 2 fingers lifted, then lowered. Not a command, an assessment. The meaning was clear to everyone trained to read it. This situation could still be corrected, but only if Brando corrected himself first. Brando didn't respond to the gesture. He didn't look away either. He remained exactly as he was, shoulders relaxed, spine straight, expression closed. Still in character, still immovable. A chair scraped softly behind him, not aggressively, not accidentally, someone repositioning for a better view. That was when the power dynamic shifted. Observers became witnesses. In rooms like this, witnesses are dangerous, because they force powerful men to behave. Brando turned slightly, enough to face the room rather than the men. His voice carried without effort. "If there's something that needs saying," he said, "say it where everyone can hear it. No accusation, no challenge. Just an invitation no one wanted." The request changed everything. Private pressure only works in private. Public attention corrodes it. The men hesitated. Not because they were afraid, because calculation had replaced certainty. One of them laughed quietly, once, testing the temperature. No one joined him. The laugh died alone. The older man shook his head. "This isn't the place," he said. Brando nodded. "Then it shouldn't be here," he replied. The casing was pushed back across the table, returned to its original spot, unclaimed, not withdrawn, neutralized. A director's voice cut through the stillness, unsure but necessary. Places, he said. The word sounded fragile in a room that had almost broken. The men stepped back, one by one. No rush, no apology. They hadn't lost control. They'd lost leverage, and everyone there understood the difference. The room returned to motion carefully, like glass being set back on a table after a near drop. Crew members resumed their places without speaking about what had almost happened. Nobody asked questions they didn't want answers to. A camera slate clapped softly. The sound felt like permission being granted by someone who didn't own it. In the hallway outside the set, one of the men approached Brando alone. No witnesses now, no theater. You're difficult, the man said. It wasn't an insult, it was an evaluation. Brando adjusted his cuffs, still calm. Accuracy tends to be, he replied. The man studied him for a moment longer than necessary, then nodded once and walked away. No threats followed, no calls were made, no conditions were attached. That was the confirmation. If there had been a problem, it would have continued. The casing never appeared again. It wasn't taken. It wasn't returned. It simply stopped existing in the room's memory, like an object removed by agreement. Filming resumed without alteration. Lines stayed sharp. Scenes stayed intact. Whatever had been tested had already been answered. Later, people would add details that hadn't happened. Raised voices. Slammed doors. Explicit warnings. Stories grow louder when the truth stays quiet. The truth was simpler. A boundary had been approached and quietly held. Brando never told the story publicly. There was nothing to gain from explaining a moment that worked precisely because it remained unexplained. On screen, his performance carried a weight no one could quite identify. Not aggression, not fear, control. Some films reflect reality, others disturb it. Godfather did both. And in that small room, long before audiences saw the final cut, a different decision had already been made. The men had come to tighten the machine. Brando had shown them it would only tighten under witnesses. Years later, people would argue about names. They would replace Genovese with other families, other myths. They would swear someone said something harsher. But everyone who stood under those mirror bulbs remembered the real weapon. Not a gun, not a threat spoken aloud, a refusal to move first. In rooms governed by quiet power, the man who doesn't move first is never the weakest.